Yeah. So let's start off with the obvious question. Who's your best mindset mentor ever? No, I'm joking. Let's start off with the obvious thing. Let's go for a quick bio of yourself for people who don't know you, please, mate.
Yes. So I was about to use the word normal. There's no such thing, but the general path through childhood, school, college. Went to uni, did some traveling, and then I joined the Royal Marines after that. Joined the General Corps. Did some bits and pieces in there, some trips, and then I did selection for Special Forces Communicator. So that's signals essentially attached to either SBS or SAS. Then did full selection for Special Forces and finished the rest of my career in the SBS. Did 3 tours of Afghan throughout my military career. And after, it was just under 8 years, got to the point where essentially I'd done everything that I wanted to do, ticked all the boxes that I felt I needed to, I guess, and was looking to get more control back into my life, not being away so much, and wanted to leave in my early 30s as opposed to later on, so that I could have a new career, however that looked. Had no idea how that would look, so sort of took that leap into the unknown. My partner at the time got a job in London, so we moved there. I got a job in a management consultancy. Thought, maybe the office thing's my next route. Did 2 weeks and realised very quickly that that was definitely not my route. I still continued in that role for another couple of years, but that entire time I was sort of looking for what that next opportunity was, and that came in the form of business, online business specifically, because that appealed to me as a person, being my own boss and having geographical freedom, the whole sort of only having to have your laptop to be able to work from anywhere. And then that over the past, that was mid 2015. So over the last sort of 7 years has been a real up and down journey of mistakes and lessons learned. At one point, John, who's my business partner, who I served in the military with, ended up living back at my parents, who were stone broke after our first business failed. So it was kind of mid-30s, stepbrother setup, shared a car, worked from my mum's dining room table. And through all of this came the Natural Edge came out of it, which is the company that we have now. And that in itself has been a journey of coaching various different things. We've done everything from sleep, nutrition, training, and mindset, through to now, which is just focusing on mindset. Basically, because of everything that we learn or have seen through that coaching journey, combined with what really interests us, is that when people make the switch with their mindset, everything else becomes easier. So that's sort of zoned our focus down to what we do now and brings us up to present.
Nice. It's always strange to ask a question like this when I would consider you my mate as well as someone that I'm having on the podcast, guest and a colleague and all that kind of stuff. What were you like as a kid?
That's a really good question. I would say I've always been pretty independent. My mum always tells a story that when I was at Cub Scout camp, so what are you then, probably like 8 or something, all the other kids would be ready to leave and go home, and I'd be quite happy just staying there, carrying on. Nothing to say I haven't got a bad home life, I should point out. It's not like I wanted to avoid going back. But yeah, I grew up on a small dairy farm in the countryside, so very much into the outdoors, always outdoors, always into camping, hunting, fishing, that kind of lifestyle. So yeah, pretty independent. I say quite naturally competitive. So through sports, played rugby through school. I was always, I was never the best player skills wise, but I always tried to be the fittest. So I guess health or fitness specifically has been a core part of my identity as well, which I would say is definitely impacted by watching too many 80s action films. We grew up watching like Stallone and too many reruns of Commando or Predator, secretly recording them on VHS while my parents, so I could watch them the next day. So yeah, I think Does that kind of answer? I was trying to think of any other characters. So pretty good, happy childhoods, definitely.
Where did you learn that kind of drive to be the best from, or to push yourself to kind of be the fittest?
I think it's definitely comes from a hard work ethos from my parents. So, small farming is incredibly hard. You do it because you love it. You definitely do it for the money. And especially when we were growing up there was a foot and mouth crisis, there was BSE, looking back retrospectively, I don't know how my parents, did what they did. And we never had anything extravagant. All our holidays were in Devon, but we didn't want for anything either. My parents basically put myself and my sister first. But my dad would be up at 4:30 every day milking the cows. You wouldn't be until obviously you come in at periods of the day, but wouldn't finish till nine at night. Even now when I see them, my dad's 72, and my mum's not quite that, but not far behind. And they're still, lambing season's just about to come up. They've still got 200 sheep. They don't have any cows anymore. And for a month and a half, they are up at all hours in like bitter cold, like that sleep deprivation. I mean, it is hard. I completely take my hat off to them. What they do at that age is more than what a lot of people can do in their 20s. So I definitely that side of things influenced me. And then outside of that, is it cultural influences? Like I said, I joke about those films, but it definitely resonated. I think from a very young age, I wanted to join the military, and that was very clear to me. I was very lucky. I think it's a rare thing to know at that young. And I'm talking sort of from 5-6 years old, I was joining the military, and quite quickly, specifically the Marines. And I can't tell you where that came from, but it was so clear to me that was the path. And it probably ties into all of those things in my childhood, a love of the outdoors. That kind of, being strong and fit really did appeal to me. Like I said, watching those movies, I'm like, yeah, that, being that strong, fit guy really, I guess, imprinted on me. So I think that perhaps combined with a natural, maybe there's a natural competitive edge, because even at school, I was quite lucky. I was very lucky, had a group of friends, but even in an academic setting, it was never in our group of friends. It was cool to be good at school, if you see what I mean, as opposed to the opposite. So, wanting to get good grades, that there was competitivism in that as well as every other aspect. It wasn't, I'd say it actually pervades or did pervade all areas of my life. It wasn't just in the narrow field of fitness or sport.
Yeah, it sounds like your parents really instilled that work ethic in you. That became like your norm. And it's obviously something that you like, maybe there's genetic component to it, but also there's the kind of, this is what you grew up around and this is what you're going to naturally model.
It was always, and it was devoid of pressure. It was always, which again, I'm very lucky in that it was never the result. It was always the effort. So it was, as long as you've done your best, then that's fine, but always do your best. If you're going to do a job, do it to the best of your ability. I remember, this has just popped into my head actually, this memory, going back to the Cub Scouts again, at the end of every evening, you'd sweep the village hall, and 3 or 4 of you would take turn, you'd sweep the village hall as the close down. And I was doing that one night, and the parents wait at the back while kids are finishing. My mum came over and took the room. She's like, if you're going to do it, do it properly. So I took over doing the sweeping. So I guess it was small. It was, those small little things that do imprint on you.
One of the things that I've noticed, firstly from hanging out with you, but also like doing a bit of prep for this, listening to a few podcasts that you're on, that kind of thing, is you've seemingly, and even from this conversation so far, it seems like you had a very clear idea of success, like something that was like instilled into you, whether it's the military, whether it was becoming King's Badgeman in the Marines, whether it is going down the SF route. You've always had that. And one of the things that I know you mentioned before, but it'd be useful to touch on, is the way you've used visualization. And I don't think it was a very kind of, I don't think I'd tell me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like you sat down, read it from a book and thought, this is how I'm going to, like, I didn't read psychocybernetics and thought this is how I'm going to visualize my success. But it was in there. Firstly, how did you use that? And secondly, do you reckon you picked it up from anyone, or do you reckon it was just something that was built in?
Yeah, that's something I've thought about a little bit, especially since doing, obviously going through the Mindset Rx course and stuff with you. I think that no, I didn't. I can't, looking back, I can't consciously remember reading any books or seeing anything that talked specifically about visualization and then employing it as a tool. So the only thing I can describe it to is, because I had, from whatever those unique combination of factors coming together to give me that really clear, I guess, vision or goal of joining the military, it then became, because it was so strong, and I do mean there was no other path. It was like, that is what I'm going to do. That it naturally, because obviously we all use visualization without even realizing it. We use self-talk, we replay things in our head, we imagine things, we daydream. So we naturally do that kind of stuff. And I think because I had such a strong, I guess, end sight or where what I wanted to do, that naturally I would think about that a lot, and so create a vision around it. And I guess it did become, so when it became more of an active process, the first time I can remember is, like you said, the King's Badgeman. So when you go down for the Royal Marines, you do your 3-day potential Royal Marines course, and then you get a date to start. And when you go down to do that, you get a copy of the Globe and Laurel, which is a magazine the Royal Marines have. It's a monthly publication, and each month, the previous month's troop that's passed out, the King's Badgeman, which is awarded to the all-round best recruit, has a little picture in there, so-and-so from troop, whatever it was, is King's Badgeman. And when I saw that, from that moment, that became to me, I was like, that's what I'm going to shoot for. That's going to be my aim through training, is to be the best all-round recruit, which ties back into that competitiveness. And I didn't, it doesn't for me, well, I'll tell you another story in a minute where you can where it can become detrimental, but it wasn't pressure. It's just, it naturally made sense. It's like, if I'm going to do this, then aiming to be the best within it. And if I hadn't made King's Badgeman, what would it have been? I don't think, because still the main aim was just to become a Royal Marine. That's almost just the icing on top of that foundational layer. But it's I've just found it so powerful when you do have that strong vision, that strong picture. It makes everything else easier, because you've got something really clear to drive towards. I've learned more and more, and especially what we focus on our coaching, and I know you do as well, you also have to find enjoyment in the process. Because if you don't, and you're just looking, if I just was looking to become the King's Badgeman and putting all the focus on that, and then like hating training and not finding any enjoyment through that process, I wouldn't have stuck it. There's definitely joy in the process. I think you have to be wary so the one time when it's nearly strayed into that sort of the negative pressure side is when I went on selection for Special Forces, because again, it's something that I'd been almost driving towards for my life up until that point. I was definitely putting a lot of pressure on myself. And in between the hills phase, where you're marching around Brecon, and before you go to the jungle, you have 2 weeks where you do some range work in the UK as sort of prep and get a handle on the weapons that you're going to be using. And while we were doing some maneuvers doing that, I got a safety warning. And basically, you always have to be looking at the target as you squeeze the trigger, which makes sense. And as we were doing a break contract, so it's a very dynamic movement, I was firing down range, and I turned my head to the right to shout to the guy to like move back. And as I was turning my head, I squeezed off a round. So that was a safety violation. And you can only get two. Basically, if I'd got another one, that would have been me off the course. And so I sort of had a bit of self-talk moment on my own. I think I was walking between buildings, because you go in and you get the official warning. It's like, you've had a warning for that. And as I was leaving that talk and going back to the accommodation, I just had that realization moment of, why are you putting so much pressure? It's like, yes, this is a big thing for you, but just focus on each day. All you need to do is give your best each day, and then not worry about it. Like, the outcome will take care of itself. You're either going to be good enough or you're not going to be good enough. And putting all this pressure on is actually going to make you perform worse. You're going into that sort of over arousal state. And it was a really clear, again, I can really clearly remember it. And it was like almost just lifted. And from that point on, I just went back to what I'd always done previously in life, was just concentrate on the process. And as soon as I did that, it became much easier. It's obviously still very hard, but it just, although you've got the end goal in mind, you can just bring yourself into the present, which, as you know, is really powerful.
Yeah, well, you only had one thing to think about at that point. It wasn't like you're trying to force an outcome. It was just doing best in the moment. It sounds like there was something that really resonated with you, like an ideal that was resonating, something around that being the best. And obviously that's why SF appealed to you. And that's why the Marines, out of all the ways you could have gone into the military, probably appealed to you, like, because that's how it's promoted. And it seems like there's that constant kind of driver that you maybe understood, maybe didn't understand. Do you know what that driver is? Do you know what the kind of the central driver to your movements has been?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, this is kind of retrospective, but even it's, you know, when we talk about success, it's so subjective, and something I've come to realize more as I've sort of got older and left the military, that, you know, for me, my values drove me towards the military, as opposed to, you know, I had no interest in, I don't know, football or whatever else it could be. So those central values of striving to be the best, it's really interesting. I don't think it's an internal metric that I judge myself by, as opposed to an external. So obviously external validation is nice. For me, it's not a big part of it. And the reason I say that, like, even through growing up, I'd never cared or even asked, you know, if my parents didn't come to the game to watch me, or an athletics thing, it never bothered me. It was the result was important to me, not anyone else. Like, going back to selection, the most fulfilling part of that process was not the badging ceremony, when, you know, you get your beret and everyone's around. It was, so the hardest part of that course is the jungle phase. If you get through that, it's likely that you'll pass, but you don't know until you fly back to the UK. You're not told. But I was on the helicopter flying out of so you're under the canopy for 4 weeks, fully tactical, and then once that's index, you helicopter back to the battle camp you're staying on. And I remember very clearly sitting in that helicopter flying over the canopy, and just having that moment of, you know, you did it, you got through the jungle phase. And I didn't know if I'd passed at that point, but it was a real moment of contentment, because even if I hadn't, I would have been very disappointed, but there was nothing, I'd given everything that I could have done. There's not much else that I could have done. And obviously you make mistakes, but, and so that was enough for me. Like, so it's always been it's my internal metric of what I define that success to be, if that makes sense. And as long as I've met my standards, then I'm happy with that. I'm satisfied. So the question is, where does that come from? Is it all those, like, combinations, seeing my parents, stuff like culturally, environment I've soaked up? Is it genetically? I don't know. It's the standards that I set myself that are the most important ones. I almost actually, and again, I've tried to get better with that. I've always been awkward with like praise around stuff. So there's probably a story in itself, like, growing up, whatever it is, I've never liked that kind of external congratulatory stuff. I've never, birthdays and stuff, I don't like being in the center of, like, I'd quite happily not really do anything for it. I prefer, it's not something ironic since I do all this stuff on Instagram, but I guess, again, you're just putting out yourself. There's not people around you. So I've never been very good at taking praise or compliments. It's always been, if I'm happy, fine. Like, I don't need anyone else to define that for me.
Yeah, which is, like you said, it's strange when you do go into a world where you do have to promote yourself, where you do have to kind of step out there and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm sure, for example, CrossFit athletes deal with this, and coaches, where like kind of the path to success is to be in all ways a quiet professional. Just get your head down, do the work, don't overthink it, don't kind of think too much of yourself, don't spend more energy than is necessary promoting you and bigging yourself up. It's just kind of do the work, be quiet, do the work, and then to go into a world where you have to kind of do that is kind of confronting.
Yeah, absolutely. I struggled more. I hated drama at school. That was my worst lesson. I hated it. Just not me at all. And so yes, but again, like you was talking about, is pushing into that discomfort. And so actually, for me, that discomfort is standing in front of the camera or writing the post. Or it took me a while before I even put a picture on the T&E Instagram account of me in it. It was just sort of landscape stuff and bits in there. So it's been, and now I'm quite comfortable doing those pieces to camera, but it's been a definite gradual inoculation of progressively doing it more and more. How I've got to that point is not a natural trait.
So one of the things that you definitely get very skilled at in the military is suffering and getting into some pretty uncomfortable situations and putting up with it, essentially. When you come onto Civvy Street, that's a very different, it's not always the best tactic, just to kind of grizz through it and just, if something's difficult, just to kind of suck it up and get on with it. How have you approached the theme of hard work and embracing hardship when you've kind of transitioned from the military into the natural edge and what you're doing now?
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's that understanding of when I think, just hitting your head against a brick wall, and when you need to pivot or switch. And I think that comes from, it's the understanding the difference between struggle and suffering and something that's hard and hard work. There's, the job that I was doing in the city, say the consultancy, well paid, good position, but it just created stress because it just always felt like it just grated against, I guess, who I was and my core identity. And so always felt like a struggle because I just wasn't invested in it. Whereas although there's been a lot of hard times for T&E, going back to living at my parents', well, John and I both living there in our mid-30s, broke, when all your peer group is settling down, having families, buying houses. On the face of it, that could be a pretty shit situation and a massive hit to your kind of, I guess, ego and sense of self. But actually, because we were on, and because at that point we just started T&E, we're like, yes, this feels right. This is the path. And we didn't, we're like, fine, if this takes us 50 years, we're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives. Again, it was that kind of clarity of, this feels right. This aligns with who we are. This aligns with what we want to do. So it's like, yeah, it's tough right now. That's fine. It's hard work. I'm not afraid of that. It's when it's that struggle, it's when everything feels stressful. It just feels like it's a fight. That's, I think, that differentiation that is good to have an awareness around, to understand. So the more you can like align those actions with who you are, and apply the hard work, that's, I think, the difference. So I think, yeah, taking those lessons from the military, just to throw one back at you, I actually think one of the greatest traits that I see coming from the military and transitioning out into the civilian world is the no cuff too tough kind of mantra. And that idea that guys are just willing to give stuff a go and not worry about failing. I think, so much in the military, you just get used to things going wrong all the time. Like, from the outside, it can seem like it's quite a smooth operating machine, especially special forces, and it's just not. Stuff goes wrong all the time. The difference is people are just willing to adapt. It doesn't matter that things go wrong. It's like, fine, we'll just make it work. And I think if you can take that and apply it to the outside and not worry about failure or looking stupid, which is hard because obviously evolution's tied into it and being kicked out of the tribe and all of that stuff. Guys are going, the stories of guys going for interviews that they've got no skills for, but they just blag it basically. They just go in and just willing to put themselves out there. I've got a mate, Shimmy, who's from the military. He sometimes goes on interviews just for the crack of it. He's like, yeah, just go and have an interview for the fun, and he has none of the skills. Go for like cybersecurity jobs when he's got, he does deep sea diving. He's got no IT skills or computer skills at all. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to have a chat, just go and do it. It's good fun, isn't it? I'm like, Shimmy, most people, like, ideas at interviews are hell for most people. Like, you're doing it for a hobby. But it's just, it is that, kind of no cuff too tough, just being willing to put yourself in there. And when it's like you said, it's having that fun, isn't it? It's when you can embrace the process and not worry about failure or see it as something massively negative. It's really powerful.
Yeah. You're also building up such a tolerance for type 2 fun. Like, for people who haven't heard the phrase, so type 1 fun is when something's fun in the moment. You're like, oh, this is fun. And type 2 is obviously when you're doing it and you're like, this isn't fun at all. Then you look back at it and you think that was fun. And failing is often one of those things. Like, when you look back at your life and you recount the stories, it's very rarely the moments where everything went to plan that you recall. And if you're telling a story to anyone, that's just a boring story. Like, you tell stories when they're interesting, and what makes them interesting is that here was a challenge, this is how I initially failed, and this is how I overcame it.
Yeah, well, case in point, living back at home, sharing a car, arranging our dates on dating apps to be at the same time and place because we had to share a car to get there to go on dates. That's genuinely true.
Gets more difficult when you're heading back though, right?
Well, no, we are gentlemen. We both return. So it's you're right. When we tell the stories, those are the bits, they're the interesting ones. They're the ones that contain the entertainment, the suffering, the overcoming the adversity, whatever it is. I'd agree.
Yeah. Other than the no cuff too tough attitude, what other useful skills did you develop in the military that you think the general world can apply?
Yeah, the biggest one, which we've translated over to all the coaching we do, and it's the thing that we get the most probably feedback on as being a real game changer or shift for people, is we call it moving average. So the idea behind it is that you don't need perfection to make progress. All you need is an overall positive moving average. So it's that coming back to concentrating on the process and just looking for the small wins. So not dismissing things that you think are too small to make a difference, because in actual fact, it's the culmination of those that make the difference between people who find the success they're looking for and those that don't. If you're always looking for that perfect workout or to produce the perfect piece of work, you either spend far too long procrastinating around it and not actually taking action, or you just throw things out the window because you can't do that 60-minute workout that you planned. So instead of doing 30 minutes or changing it so you can, adapting it to what you can do, you just throw it out the window. Because you throw that out the window, you figure, well, what's the point in eating well today, because I'm not going to do the workout, so that's gone. I might as well write that off. And then that can spill into 2 days or 3 days, and then you suddenly think, oh, I'll get back on next week, as opposed to always looking for those wins. And that's something, John and I definitely did through our interest in mindset. And it was almost sparked by, it's Clive Woodward with the whole 1%, who kind of coined that phrase before it became into the cycling world, of just always looking for the 1% wins where you can find them. And military life is definitely there's so many variables, there's so many moving parts and things out of your control happening, but there are always tons of 1% that you can look to improve. And we definitely applied that mantra, and it served us really well through our military careers. And it's translated across the coaching now. And when people embrace that ethos of moving average, of not looking for perfection, but just looking for the small wins each day, that small decision of whether they're going to go for that 10-minute walk or not go for it, or whatever it is, it really makes a big difference, because you start creating consistency, and that's when you make that progress.
So now you've obviously moved into working wholly on mindset with people. What's that process look like for you?
It's very, obviously, because I went through Mindset Rx with you.
Good plug.
And so it's all yeah, good plug. Which is brilliant. That for me, it was incredibly eye-opening myself, because I went coming from special forces, you assume you have a strong mindset, and then going into the city and experiencing more stress, things not going as well as they had done previously. It realized, and it makes sense kind of retrospectively, that and Mindset Rx really highlighted this to me, that I had a strong mindset, but in a narrow field. Just because you've got a strong mindset in that sense, or within the military, that doesn't mean it carries on to the rest of life. And actually, logically now, look at it, I'm like, oh, it smacks you in the face. You can see it on a day-to-day basis, because there are guys that are brilliant in the working respects, put them in Afghan, absolutely fine, but then their family lives are falling apart, the personal lives are falling apart. So just because you can do that job, that does not mean you have a strong mindset in a well-rounded sense across all areas of life. And so Mindset Rx and really digging into or gaining clarity and perception on those areas where you're not as strong. I definitely had a fixed mindset around relationship stuff, which I dove into. And so the way that we teach now, it's almost like a combination of theory or process that I've learned through you and Mindset Rx, and then principles that we learn over the years through the other coaching, the T&E, the other programs that we've run. There's a really strong ether, or we sort of term it as a trinity. So as a triangle, on the left-hand side, you've got mindset, on the right-hand side, you've got lifestyle, and then on the bottom, you've got systems and habits. We've just seen the power, because they can't divorce the mind and body. Although we don't teach any training or nutrition, we look or have simple changes that people can make to their lifestyle around circadian rhythm, around breathing and their basic physiology, the movement, exposure to the daily light, relationship with screens, how they set their phone up, routines in the day, and an underpinning through it all of systems and habits, how to actually really form those strong routines to build that structure that creates freedom. So it's a kind of amalgamation of everything that we've learned over the years, and then tried to break it down into a really step-by-step process to make it as simple as possible for people to implement, and treating all of it, as you do, like a skill, which is what there's just, apart from what you do, what we do now, a few other people out there, who else is doing it? There's no coherent, structured framework like mindset type courses. It is just podcasts or books or odd bits of information. The example or analogy we like to use is, you wouldn't read a diet book and expect to lose weight, and yet that's exactly how everyone approaches mindset. They listen to an odd podcast or read a book and expect to make long-term changes. And that passive consumption of information it doesn't work. It needs to become an active process.
Yeah, I think previously you had to rely on a lot of luck to put you in the right situation to begin with, and to give you the right starting mentality. And then you had to go into a variety of challenging experiences, which would each consecutively stress you and stress the limits of your mindset. And then you'd have to grow or basically finish it, and then that would be your chances. Hence why you looked up to people who were sporting greats or people who were leaders, and you had the chance of learning through them. But now we're in this situation where you've got access to more information than ever before, and you have this available to you, but it's about finding a way to implement it into your own life and do the mental reps. Because like you said, you can't just read information. You've got to rewire that neural structure. You got to do the reps, do the sets. You got to, equally as important, recover from it. And that's what creates change. Not just, you're not going to see a new idea and that becomes your reality. You're going to have to reinforce that pathway.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's the power. I think that's where the power comes from. I guess it ties into growth and fixed mindset thinking itself as a principle. When you see it as a skill and something that you can work on, as opposed to just something you have or don't have, I think that's a common trap that people fall into. They're just like, well, I just don't, this is just who I am, and that's it basically, and that person can do it because that's who they are, as opposed to what experiences have allowed that, or what have they gone through to allow that person to be like that, and can I replicate that? And 9 times out of 10, yes, you can in certain ways. Obviously, we're all going to have different starting points, but anyone can make massive changes if you just follow a good process and have that consistency.
Yeah. Well, it's a cliche point, but all you see is the highlight reel. On TV, even when you're watching sporting events, it's you see the highlight reel, you see the highs and the lows, and you see whether they either have it or they don't. You don't see the sets and reps. You don't see the fact that they are working with a sports psych, or you don't see the fact that they are reading the whole time or meditating or whatever they are doing. You don't see the fact that they are banning themselves and setting hard limits on their phone use, because it's not the sexy stuff, it's not the glamorous stuff, and it's it's a lot more fun to say, hey, look at this natural ability, look at the genius, look at the sporting brilliance of this person. They've always had it since they're a kid, as opposed to saying, yeah, they probably had that and they did these trillions of steps along the way.
Yeah, you've hit upon it there. It's the boring, not the sexy, isn't it? It's we're always looking, and because we're constantly sold on it now, it's always, and because it taps into, it's good marketing, it taps into human psychology. We always want that magical thing that is going to make the big change, as opposed to, which probably comes back to, you find, the people who always reach those great heights and whatever it is, when you dig into the story, there's a love in the process. And with the love of the process, you do the stuff that's boring, which is inevitable part of any journey. There's an article by James Clear when he was talking to an Olympic weightlifting coach, and he said, what do you see as the big difference between people who make it and people don't? If you set aside genetics and some of those factors, what's the biggest differentiating component? And he said, it's those that are willing to work through the boredom, or can go through the boredom, day in, day out, doing the repetitive, boring tasks that it is required to get to that high level in whatever it is that you're striving to. And it's true, look back to build up selection, going out and, just putting your Bergen on, and I just find a really steep hill and stick a podcast on and walk up and down it for a few hours on a Saturday. When you could be going out and doing all those other things, just the boring stuff that no one wants to do. But if you can if you can do it and actually still find a way to find satisfaction from it and in that process, that's the real difference, I think.
Yeah. And I think the important thing there is it's very easy to look around and see what other people are doing and assume that's what you should be doing too. But what other people, like, very few other people are going to listen to this podcast and find the same meaning that you did in sticking a burden on your back and walking up and down a hill for 3 hours. Like,
because it's shit.
Yeah, it's shit unless you have that meaning, unless you've kind of, you found that resonance with, okay, this taps into a fundamental part of who I am. And it's the same whether, I know you're a fan of Shane McConkey, for example. Very few people would want to stick skis on their feet and base jump off a cliff. Like, but for him, that was so meaningful, probably a bit too meaningful, as like you find out how it ends. But like, he had that meaning. And I think for most people, it's about trying new things, experiencing that failure time and time again, getting to kind of be adaptable, to cuff it a few times until you find, hey, this is my thing. This is the most meaningful thing for me. And chances are it's very unlikely that that's what the people around you also find meaningful.
Yeah, I think more so Shane McConkey. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, the documentary McConkey is worth a watch. Just if you just want to see someone who lives very authentically, just lives his life, I guess, on his terms. But I think more than the sort of finding meaning with jumping off the cliff, it's this injury highlight reel, like how many people are going to go through the amount of broken bones that you had, torn ACL, like the pain, the recovery, the rehab. People aren't going to do that. Same with athletes. Again, you see the athlete reel, no one sees all the social stuff that they give up, that they sacrifice. Spending all your time training or recovering, and it has to become your life, because otherwise you're not going to get to that top level. And so if you didn't have the deep, that deep meaning, didn't have that attached to it, you're never going to do it. And I think with all of this, it doesn't matter what that is to anyone. It's all subjective, and these are all extreme examples. It's really just working out what it is for you on a day-to-day basis. And maybe that's just taking up a new hobby. I think people don't like to ask, and often don't ask, the deep questions about who they are and how they want their life to look, because sometimes the answers that come up might mean questioning things they don't want to question around relationships that they're in, jobs that they do, whatever it is. But it's the whole easy life, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. If we're always making the short-term choices for what we think is the easier option, over the long term, it's probably going to be far harder. Whereas if we can get through that discomfort in the short term, then our lives will probably be much more fulfilling and satisfying as a result of it. That's really easy to say. Again, when you're in the situation, it can be a lot harder, but it comes back to the moving average. You don't have to make career shifts overnight, or end marriages overnight. Perhaps in the beginning, just small changes, like taking up a new hobby, whatever it is, just something, the way that you run your life, I don't know, just little things that you can make. Look for those 1% to bring things more into alignment with who you are. That in itself will make a big change. It doesn't have to be, cataclysmic shifts overnight.
It's a threatening thing to do, to challenge your own beliefs in that fashion. We just had Jonas Kaplan, who is a neuroscientist who focuses on the study of belief. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it was essentially that beliefs entangled in the web of our lives, or something along those ideas, meaning that you have a belief about this is the way I should live my life, and maybe that's conscious or unconscious, but that belief is tied into the things that you do every single day, the friends that you have, the relationships you have with your spouse, your health, your mentality, like everything is connected to that belief. So to truly see it and to think, okay, like this might not be serving me, and to get rid of it could be sacrificing all of that stability that you've that you benefit from in some way, but the price that you pay if you don't is even bigger, because the price that you pay is essentially a life well lived.
And you're going to get to that end point of that life and look back.
Yeah.
There is no going back at that point. Although it's quite, I think people see it as a morbid exercise. Actually, I don't see death as a bad thing. We've had this discussion before. Constantly shying away from it as we do in the Western culture doesn't help at all, as opposed to just really embracing the fact that you don't know when that time's up. You could walk out tomorrow and get hit by a car or whatever it is. Death, we're all walking towards that at some point. And so, when you get there, you really want to look back and have had that fulfilling life, that that satisfaction, and found that happiness, and found it through the process, not waiting for these different milestones that we think, whether that's buying a certain house or getting a certain promotion, whatever it is. It's like, yes, that can be fulfilling, but it always lasts for a short while. That's never long lasting. And so if we're just putting our happiness off to those points and not finding fulfillment in the process, which will never come, like you said, if those things are out of alignment, it's just not going to happen. Then we just waste so much of our lives. Yeah.
You absolutely nailed it there. It's the things that will, inevitably, when you look at those studies of people who are on their deathbeds, the things that they regret are not the things they did, it's things they didn't do. It's the things that they kind of said no to. It's things that they said they were too busy because of work, those kind of things. One of the kind of aspects one of the things that reinforces this is two philosophies like Buddhism and that kind of Eastern culture that we kind of reject in the West at some point, and Stoicism. The overlap between two of them are huge. How do you apply a Stoic mentality?
I think, to take the title of the book, the big ones that I take away from it is The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday's classic book, because I think it sums up so much of, how to phrase this, or just encompasses so much of many of the mindset ideals. If you can see every challenge or every event, no matter what it is and how it turns out, as something that just contributes to your process and will inform your growth, then nothing becomes insurmountable. And no matter what's happening, it can always be something to be seen, from a positive angle. Obviously, straying too, it's not the fact that you're seeing, that uber or over positive, where you're seeing everything as, everything's great. Obviously, we're all going to have those bad days, and that in itself can be negative. But just seeing that no matter what's happening, because if we look back through our lives, most of the time, no matter what it is that's happened, even if at the time it seems really bad, the changes afterwards or where we've ended up wouldn't have happened if we'd not been through that. Everything up until this point has led us to where we are. If I look at T&E, there's loads of stuff I would have done differently and changed. But having said that, we wouldn't be where we are now without that. And we could be in an even worse position if perhaps we've made different choices. So I think it helps to let go of that need or that want, the natural human desire for the crystal ball of needing to know the outcomes of whatever it is. And just being in that moment and just taking it as part of the process, no matter what the obstacle is. So that's definitely something that's massive. And I think as well that the whole, going back to the death, the talk around death, seeing it as something that we are all going to go through, that it is part of life as well. And having, we've got our loved ones, giving them the most that we can in the time, but then when it's done, being able to let go of that, which again it's an easy thing to say and hard to do. I think, we've talked about it before, and you see it written about Stoicism. It's not about letting all, like becoming completely uber logical and letting go of all of your emotions. I think it's actually getting more in tune with them and understanding where those emotions come from. I don't know what your, but yeah, I think that's
I think
kind of where I stick.
Yeah, like emotions, we wouldn't have evolved emotions if they didn't serve a purpose. So to try and dismiss them is to reject evolution, and it's also to reject reality. And both those things are kind of indisputable. Like they're there for a reason. So they prove, they give you a useful tool to use, but they're not the only tool. And sometimes that we overweight our emotional state, and sometimes we underweight it. It's like, I think the way to approach it is like, okay, this is another data point that I can use. Like in the same way that one of the ways that you can see if something is meaningful to you and that the suffering and the hardship that you're enduring is worthwhile is because it feels different. It feels kind of icky. I'm sure it felt icky when you're in like in the corporate environment for those 2 weeks where you're just like, okay, this is tough, but it feels shit. And my mind is full of negative thoughts and my body is full of negative feelings and emotions. But put yourself in a different scenario, put yourself like 3 pitches up on a multi-pitch climb and you're pumped out of your mind, and it's something that is very, very, it feels different. The hardship feels different. So there's the emotional state that is there for a reason. One thing I want to come back to is like, you were talking about kind of the obstacle is the way. And there's this idea that looking back at it, it's obvious retrospectively, it's obvious that this was a good thing. It really, really served me. But those things are happening now, yet we try and dismiss them. So it's about keeping that reference point of like, okay, this is, in the words of Jocko Willink, good. Like this is happening. Like this is exactly what I needed right now. And that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, that's where it's almost, so this is where moving average comes back in. That is the constant that I always come back to. So when John and I, when things aren't going with business, whatever it is, we always just come back to, this is just part of the process. This point in time is just this point in time. This is not the definition of good or bad. Like this does not define the business as a whole. This doesn't define me as a whole. It is just simply a part of the process. And no matter how shit it feels, if we just go back to the fundamentals, keep taking the action, and that's the other thing, actually taking action as opposed to being frozen and just staying in that suffering state, then you'll get through it and it will change. It may change tomorrow, it may change in a week's time or whatever it is. So that's why I find moving average really powerful again. And that is what I come back to constantly when those feelings start to creep up, is just part of the process. Just keep moving forward.
Nice. I can't think of a better way to wrap this up than right there. Thank you for joining me, mate. It's a pleasure to speak to you always.
Pleasure, as always. Yep.
Where can people find out a little bit more about yourself, follow your work, find out about your coaching, that kind of thing?
The easiest thing is just Instagram, The Natural Edge, or any social media, and the website's thenaturaledge.com. That's probably the easiest one. And you're always welcome feedback. So if you want to drop a note or anything from this podcast or ask a question, just send it through a DM or an email. Always reply to them. It's just great to hear people's perspective on things we've talked about, or if there's other stuff that would be good to dive into, people's what would be helpful, I guess.
Nice, mate. Nice. Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.